Welcome into Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Thank you guys for joining me here on a Wednesday. Technically, it's my day off, but we did get some kind of Steelers rumors updates here that I want to kind of discuss today with some interesting topics surrounding the Pittsburgh Steelers. Earlier today, we put out our weekly in-depth game preview this week for Week 16 versus the Detroit Lions. If you guys want to see my full breakdown of the Detroit Lions roster, the big storylines heading into this game, my keys to victory for the Steelers to improve to 9-6 and get this win in the Motor City, and then my official score prediction. Make sure you guys check out that video. I'll put the chip to that one in the top right. So if you guys want to check out that video, you can. But make sure you click that subscribe button to never miss any of our videos this week or any week right here on Steelers Talk. So I'm just going to dive right into it here, guys. Where the Pittsburgh Steelers hosted 4 edge rushers on visits today in Southside Pittsburgh. O'Shane Ximines, Ronnie Perkins, Casey Toohill, and Isaiah Thomas all visited the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, the Steelers have not signed any of them to either the active roster or the practice squad at the time of me recording this video, but the fact that they're bringing in people here to potentially sign tells me that the Steelers feel like there's at least a chance that TJ Watt and Nick Herbig will not be good to go this week. Of course, Herbig has suffered a new hamstring injury that he suffered in Monday night's game against the Dolphins, and TJ Watt, of course, is still dealing with the recovery from surgery last week on his lung after a partially collapsed lung happened with him during a dry needling session at the team's facility last Wednesday. So the fact that they are bringing in people here to try out and see if they can help us this week tells me that there's at least a legitimate possibility that TJ Watt or Nick Herbig are both going to be out for Sunday's game, and obviously that's going to present some problems for the Steelers in terms of their depth. You still have Alex Highsmith, who's playing really good football right now. He would be your number one guy, but my guess is he would get a lot of double team help. And then you have Jack Sawyer, the rookie out of Ohio State, making his first NFL start against Penei Sewell, who might be the best right tackle in the game. So that's definitely going to put the Steelers' pass rush at a little bit of a disadvantage if that ends up being the case, especially because, Jared Goff is the type of quarterback where if he's clean, he is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, throwing the ball down the field. And having TJ Watt and Nick Herbig in this game would be huge for the Pittsburgh Steelers, trying to disrupt things for him, because the way you beat Jared Goff is you put pressure on him. And if, the Steelers' pass rush, especially on the edge, is not everything that it could be this weekend, there's certainly a chance Goff could rip apart this Steelers defense. So that's not great news. That's not a great designation. If you're wondering who would be the third rotational edge rusher for the Steelers this week, if Watt and Herbig are out, it's likely to be DeMarvin Leal. Now, Leal obviously hasn't played a ton this year. He has played a little bit, but not a ton, and he's not even close to dynamic or anything like that. So he would just be a stopgap for this team. And obviously the hope is that either Watt or Herbig is going to be able to go. Obviously the ideal situation is both of them can go, but sometimes that's not the case. And we've said all season long, the depth along this outside linebacker group is one of the strengths of this Pittsburgh Steelers defense, but it only goes 4 deep in terms of your comfortable depth. And now that you're dealing with not 1 but 2 injuries to the edge rusher room, things are getting a little bit more uncomfortable heading into this week, especially in a week where you got to take advantage of this opportunity. You got to get pressure on Jared Goff if you want to stop that Detroit Lions passing attack. Another name that could be added to the pile here in terms of names the Steelers could look at is Matthew Judon. Judon was released by the Miami Dolphins today. Judon did not play well on Monday night against the Steelers, and Judon has really struggled these last 2 years. He tried getting paid by the New England Patriots after a really good 2023 season. He held out of camp last year in New England, and then he ends up getting released, and he ends up going to the Atlanta Falcons. where he did not have a good season last year. Then he goes to the Dolphins this year, and once again, not a good season for him. So, you could think, is Judon better than O'Shane Ximines, Casey Toohill, these other guys the Steelers have brought in? Can make an argument for it, but honestly, you'd just much rather have TJ Watt or Nick Herbig be good enough to go in this football game. And, we'll see if Judon clears waivers. Obviously, he clears waivers tomorrow. So it'll be interesting to see here if the Steelers are interested in bringing him in, because, he kind of fits the Steelers' profile of, quote unquote cast-offs, as Aaron Rodgers likes to put it, guys that, are released, or, veteran players looking for a shot at, to compete in the playoffs, whatever. And Judon, as a rotational third edge rusher, might be better than DeMarvin Leal, or O'Shane Ximines, or Casey Toohill, or one of these other guys that they brought in for workouts today. And the fact that they didn't sign any of these guys that they worked out today might be a sign that the Steelers could be looking to maybe put in a waiver claim for Matthew Judon. So keep your eye out for that. If they end up bringing him in tomorrow, we'll cover that here on the show. But the fact that they are looking at edge rushers this week, I think, is a sign that, there's at least a legitimate possibility that both TJ Watt and Nick Herbig will not play this week against Detroit. And Jack Sawyer is in line to probably get his first NFL start this week in the Motor City. Speaking of waivers, Alan Lazard cleared waivers today, so he's free to sign with anybody that he chooses. Obviously, that means the Steelers didn't put in a waiver claim for him. If that were the case, Lazard would have had to automatically be added to the Steelers' active roster. They likely would have had to release Scotty Miller if that were the case. So I think that's, we said it on the show a couple days ago, or I think it was yesterday, talking about this. I did not see the Steelers putting in a waiver claim for Alan Lazard. Obviously, they've brought in MVS and Adam Thielen in recent weeks, and those guys have ascended past Calvin Austin III and Roman Wilson as the number 2 and number 3 receiving options here in Pittsburgh. And, when it comes to Lazard, obviously he's a bigger receiver that had over 500 yards receiving from Aaron Rodgers last year in New York. And obviously he's had some very successful seasons with Aaron in Green Bay as well. So something that I could see happen, guys, is that if nobody else is really looking to sign Lazard and add him to an active roster spot, which I'm guessing is his preference, I could see Lazard potentially being brought into Pittsburgh here this week on the practice squad, just like they did with MVS. And Lazard would not be elevated this week. And he might not be elevated at all. Like, they might just bring him on the practice squad for the rest of the year, and he might not even have an opportunity to be raised up from the P squad, and maybe they reevaluate him next year if Rodgers decides to come back. I'm sure Lazard would love to play with Rodgers here in Pittsburgh as like a 4th receiver or 5th receiver in the rotation going into 2026. I could see that being a possibility. But with it being so late, and with this offense relying so much on multiple calls in the pocket and all that different stuff, I just don't really see a world here where Alan Lazard, signs with the Steelers, and within the matter of, especially this week, but probably for the rest of the regular season, we see Alan Lazard get a helmet for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So just keep that in mind here. I could see them signing him to the practice squad this week or next week or whatever, if he can't find an active roster spot somewhere else. But I would say at this point, don't expect Alan Lazard to be getting meaningful snaps or anything from the Pittsburgh Steelers this year, unless there's some sort of injury. Now, the final thing I want to talk about on today's show, might be why you clicked on this video, is I want to talk about Tua Tagovailoa. And Tua, obviously, if you've heard the news today, the Miami Dolphins are benching Tua as their starting quarterback, and they are starting 7th-round rookie Quinn Ewers over him for the final 3 weeks of the NFL season. Now, obviously, this creates a really sticky situation for Miami, because Tua still has a ton of guaranteed money left on his contract, and it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for Miami to cut Tua next year. So he might end up being, the next iteration here of Kirk Cousins, where he might be the most expensive backup quarterback in the league next year. But my guess is if the Dolphins can trade Tua Tagovailoa next offseason, they will jump at the chance to do that. Heck, they might even trade Tua and, a decent draft pick to a different team just to get him off their books, because there is a lot of money on his contract, and I'm guessing the Dolphins would pay a team a pretty decent rate here to get him off their books and start building for the future, because it's pretty clear Tua is not the future in Miami. And, with Aaron Rodgers and a potential retirement coming up and the Steelers potentially looking for a new starting quarterback, you already know that there's going to be whispers about Tua being an option for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I'm just here to tell you guys, that would be my personal worst case scenario for the Steelers at quarterback in 2026. I mean, you guys saw how that quarterback played on Monday night in the elements, in the AFC North, in Pittsburgh, when it was below 20 degrees. This guy cannot play in the cold. And the Pittsburgh Steelers, as we know, late in the season, have to play in the cold. And Tua is somebody that struggled this year and threw a lot of interceptions, even when, the conditions and the weather conditions were conducive to his success. I mean, he's somebody that throws with a lot of anticipation, and, he's a really good RPO passer, and there's certain things about Tua that are good, okay? But he doesn't have really any arm strength. He can't play in cold conditions, so his upside come playoff time is extremely limited if he has to play in a cold weather football game. And he's really expensive as well. If the Steelers trade for him, they have to take on a lot of that money. And I just don't see that being something that I want for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Okay, I could literally see any other option that they could go down in 2026 as a better option for this football team than trading for Tua Tagovailoa. If they wanted to go with Will Howard next year, a complete and utter unknown, I would rather do that than trade for Tua Tagovailoa next year. If they wanted to bring in Geno Smith next year in free agency, or even trade for Geno Smith next year, that's something that I would prefer over trading for Tua Tagovailoa. At least Geno has a stronger arm, right? But obviously Geno's not the most ideal candidate either. And just to go back to the cold weather point, like, it's something that the Steelers quarterback needs to have. The quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, if this team is going to have success, especially late in the season and in the postseason, needs to be a guy that can perform in the cold. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring in Aaron Rodgers this year, is because he's always played in the cold. He's always played very well in the cold. He's got huge hands that can handle a cold football and a slick football if it's snowy outside. He's always been able to play in these kinds of conditions, and we're seeing how well he's playing in these kinds of conditions. These last 2 weeks have been some of his best weeks as a Pittsburgh Steeler, and it couldn't be coming at a better time for this football team. If you then, if Rodgers decides to retire, and then you turn to Tua frickin' Tagovailoa on that massive contract, and he can't play in the cold, that's going to be, one of the worst moves, in my opinion, in Pittsburgh Steelers franchise history. All right. So as much as I don't love some of the options at quarterback next year, like Geno and like Kyler and Daniel Jones, I'm not in love with any of those options. And I'm also not in love with starting a rookie next year either. Not the biggest fan of doing the J.J. McCarthy thing and going with a complete unknown at quarterback either with Will Howard. Like, there's not a ton of options right now that I see other than, finding a way to trade for Matthew Stafford, which is incredibly unlikely, that I really, really like for the Steelers at quarterback next year. Maybe outside of, if Rodgers continues to play well down the stretch, would love for him to come back for another season, all right? Like, if he wanted to come back for Cam Hayward's final year of his career so that they could walk off into the sunset together, I could certainly get on board with another season of Aaron Rodgers if he continues to play at the caliber that he's playing right now for the rest of this season. That might be the best course of action for the Steelers, because not only will you get Rodgers back, and he's already had a year in this system, year two, obviously, you tend to see a jump from quarterbacks in year two of a system compared to their first year. But also, he's got that established chemistry with the guys in the locker room. That doesn't have to be rebuilt with a new quarterback. And then also the money aspect of things. I mean, Rodgers obviously signed this year for a super team friendly deal when in terms of, retrospectively, when you look at other quarterback contracts around the league. And he would do the same thing again next year for sure. So, right now, I still view Aaron Rodgers as one of the better options for Pittsburgh at the quarterback position at QB1 next year. We'll see what they end up doing. We'll see how the season ends for Rodgers here this year. We'll see if he ends up retiring. But I'm just here to tell you guys, my least favorite option at quarterback next year is Tua Tagovailoa. So, before those conversations even begin, I want to shut those down. I'm going to continue to completely shut that down, along with Kirk Cousins, by the way. All right, two guys that cannot throw the football with any sort of velocity. Kirk Cousins and Tua Tagovailoa would be the worst case scenario options for me for the Pittsburgh Steelers at quarterback next year. All right, so that's going to be it for today's show, guys. I appreciate you sticking with me here to the end of today's show. Tomorrow I'll be back in studio. Ponzi and I will be going live for our only live show this week. We'll be discussing a bunch of injury updates. We'll be talking about maybe some draft stuff as well. We'll answer your questions on the mailbag. It's going to be a lot of fun tomorrow. That's going to start probably at 5 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow. Steelers Talk Live. Going to have a lot to talk about on tomorrow's show, guys. So make sure you click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Until tomorrow, guys. Here we go, Steelers.